You think surviving ancient Egypt meant dodging crocodiles in the Nile or sweating beside a pyramid. But one of the most dangerous things in the ancient world could be sitting on your dinner plate. Bread. Picture this. You have spent all day beneath a white-hot desert sun. You sit down with the food that keeps your family alive. You bite into a loaf and feel something hard scrape across your teeth. Not a seed, not a bone, sand, grit, tiny fragments of stone. For many ancient Egyptians, that was not a strange accident. It was a repeated hazard of turning grain into the staple food of an entire civilization. Modern bread comes from carefully cleaned grain. Steel rollers, sealed factories, and soft packaged loaves. Remove all of that. Now you are in the Nile Valley thousands of years ago. Grain has to be grown, harvested, carried, cleaned, crushed, sieved, mixed, and baked by hand. Every stage is exposed to dust, wind, stone tools, and the desert itself. Bread was central to Egyptian life. It fed homes, workers, temples, and travelers, but making it was slow, physical work. Grain was commonly ground by hand with a heavy rubbing stone moving back and forth across a larger stone base. Archaeologists call one common setup a saddle quern. Imagine grinding hour after hour. The grain becomes flour, but the stone does not stay perfectly still. Its surface wears too. Tiny mineral particles can join the flour. Coarse husk fragments can stay in it. And when wind-blown desert sand gets into grain, flour, dough, or an outdoor oven, it adds another abrasive layer. That does not mean every loaf was identical or that every Egyptian swallowed a mouthful of sand at every meal. But archaeologists and dental researchers have a very clear clue that gritty food was a serious, widespread problem. Their teeth. Look at an ancient Egyptian skull, and you can sometimes see a lifetime of meals carved directly into the mouth. Teeth that should have had strong, white enamel are worn nearly flat. Some are ground down so far that the softer layer beneath the enamel, called dentine, is exposed. Think of your tooth as a small building. Enamel is the tough outer wall. Dentine is the softer material underneath. At the center is the pulp, living tissue, nerves, and blood vessels. Now imagine using the same tooth to chew abrasive bread morning, noon, and night. The grit acts less like ordinary food and more like an extremely fine file. Over years, the outer wall wears down, then the dentine. Then, in severe cases, the wear reaches the pulp, and that is when a rough loaf turns into a serious medical problem. If you have ever had a severe toothache, you know how completely it can take over your day. A tooth with an exposed or infected pulp can throb with every heartbeat. Hot food hurts, cold water hurts, chewing hurts, sleeping hurts. But this was not a modern dental clinic. There was no x-ray to see the damage, no anesthetic injection, no drill, filling, root canal, or antibiotic prescription. Bacteria from the mouth could enter the damaged tooth. The tissue inside could die. Then an abscess, a pocket of infection and pus, could form at the root, deep in the jaw. The pain was not the whole danger. Infections in the head and neck can spread. In a world without modern treatment, a severe dental infection could become life-threatening. And the evidence is not just one unlucky person. Studies of Egyptian remains repeatedly find extreme tooth wear. The mouth of a farmer, a worker, or a high-status official could preserve the same brutal message. Daily food had slowly turned into a tool of abrasion. So why did a civilization sophisticated enough to build monumental temples keep eating bread that hurt them? Because bread was not optional. It was the fuel of life along the Nile. Because bread was not optional. It was the fuel of life along the Nile. That is the cruel part of this story. The same food that could slowly damage a person's teeth was also the food that made survival possible. Grain could be stored, flour could be shared, a loaf could travel, bread turned a harvest into something a family could depend on long after the field was empty. Ancient Egyptians were not unaware of tooth pain. Surviving medical texts include remedies for problems in the mouth. Some treatments used mixtures of plant material, minerals, and honey. They were trying to do something to calm pain, reduce swelling, or keep a damaged tooth usable. But there is a hard limit to what a paste can do when the inside of a tooth has been worn open. Modern dentistry treats a broken tooth by removing infected tissue, sealing the space, or extracting the tooth safely. In ancient Egypt, evidence for routine surgical dental treatment is scarce. Archaeologists have found a few unusual examples that people once interpreted as dental work, but many are debated. We should not imagine a modern dentist in a linen robe waiting to fix a worker's tooth. For many people, the likely reality was simpler and worse. Endure the pain. Eat more carefully. Lose a tooth. Live with an abscess if you could. Hope the infection did not spread. Now, zoom out. This is what makes the Egyptian bread story more than a bizarre historical fact. It exposes a rule of ancient survival. The thing keeping you alive could also be the thing wearing you down. The Nile gave Egypt water and fertile fields. The harvest produced grain. Grain became bread. Bread fed a civilization. But the desert, the grinding stones, and the roughness of the process could make that staple abrasive enough to leave marks on bones thousands of years later. It was a trade-off hidden in every meal, and those meals were not all identical. Egyptian bakers made different shapes and types of bread. They used ovens, molds, and fermentation. Bread could be plain or flavored, ordinary or ceremonial. It appeared in homes, offerings, and burials. A civilization famous for pyramids was, in an ordinary sense, also built on a loaf. That is why the tooth damage is so revealing. It is not evidence that Egyptians were careless or simple. It is evidence of the scale of their food system. When millions of meals are made by hand in a sandy landscape, small imperfections become a lifetime of consequences. Think about the last piece of bread you ate. The flour was milled mechanically. The grain was cleaned. The loaf was wrapped. Your biggest concern might be calories, carbs, or whether the crust is too hard. For an ancient Egyptian, the problem could be far more immediate. Each bite might contain a little more of the landscape, a grain of sand, a fragment of stone, a rough husk. Nothing dramatic in one mouthful, but repeated thousands of times, it could grind down the body itself. At first, the damage might have been easy to ignore. A tooth feels a little rough. The edge of a molar is flatter than it used to be. Then chewing becomes uncomfortable. Then a hot meal sends a sharp flash through the jaw. Finally, the tooth is no longer just worn. It is open, painful, and vulnerable to infection. And there was no simple escape route. A family could not decide to stop relying on grain because it was rough. Grain was what they could grow beside the Nile, store through hard seasons, carry on journeys, and turn into dependable calories. Even a careful sieve could remove only the larger unwanted pieces. Fine grit and mineral dust were harder to catch. That is why this was a slow survival problem, not a one-day disaster. A crocodile attacks once. A bad tooth can attack every time you eat. It follows you through a workday, through sleep, through every attempt to take another bite of the food you need to live. The pyramids made Egypt look eternal. Their teeth show something more human. Someone was hungry. Someone needed to work tomorrow. Someone bit into bread because they had no choice. And the desert bit back.